Welcome to this first of our EACTP webinars, RAP 2020 and Outlook 2021. Just to let you know, this will be recorded and it will be rebroadcast at TMA Global next week as well. And there will be slides that you can take away. They will be made available after the event. So as not to interrupt the event, we aren't going to be showing them on the screen at the moment, but you will have them to take away. If you could stay on mute, that would be very helpful. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat box and I'll be monitoring the chat box throughout. The speakers have said that they would appreciate being able to speak and then answer questions at the end. So please do post the questions in the chat box and we will answer those at the end. Okay, thank you very much to all the speakers. I'll hand over to Alain and please enjoy.
Thank you very much, Helen, for setting all this up, and thank you and hello again to all of you. So just very briefly to introduce my fellow speakers today, Gert Boon from the Leiden University. He's a researcher and lecturer there in the field of turnaround, rescue, and insolvency. Publishes in national and international journals and has been involved in a number of pan-European projects, such as the business rescue project of the European Law Institute. For those of you who don't know it yet, I think it's fair to say at this stage that Leiden University has developed together with the EACTP an online turnaround certification program that will be launched in this year, actually later this year. So I'm sure we will all be hearing a lot about it in the next few months.
Earlier this year, Alain, sorry, before the end of March, it will all be online and ready to go.
Excellent. So that's great work. Hadrien is now with Tosca Capital, a boutique he founded about 18 months ago to perform special situations, carve-outs and standalone turnarounds or LBOs on European SMEs with an operational angle. And prior to that, Hadrien has more than 10 years experience of distressed investing and turnaround investing with operational private equity and restructuring houses. We're talking the likes of 3i, Anchorage Capital, the Gores Group, so very well-known investors in our space. And as far as I'm concerned, well, many of you here know me, but I have now something like 30 years of experience in turnaround, restructuring, stressed, distressed, and special situations of any kind. Interim management, advisory, consulting, board memberships, everything that has anything to do with a special situation angle. I'm based in Switzerland, but active internationally across Europe and even across the Middle East as well. And we recently, with Greg, who's also on that call, we recently co-founded, and a few other colleagues of us, we co-founded the Swiss chapter of the Turnaround Management Association of TMA in Europe, which had not been there yet. So with that, directly into the subject matter. So rest in peace 2020. I think all of us were really glad to see the back of that year. Certainly the more perhaps a notable event in that year is that we, with a few exceptions, we did not experience the tsunami of work that could have been expected and that a few people had actually forecasted for last year as a consequence of the pandemic. I think we all know this. We also all know why this tsunami didn't take place, a combination of state support in the various countries, whether it's furlough in the UK, Kurzarbeit in Germany, chômage partiel in France, the state guaranteed loans or direct subsidies of every kind, which were extended in the various countries. That's one side of one part of the reasons. Other reasons include the real, heartening in a way, resilience and reactivity of the players. I think a lot of people burnt a lot of their cushions and of their cash reserves in the process, which is going to certainly take its toll when it comes to, facing 2021 and the new challenges in this year. But it's fair to say that there was also a heartening level of support between the various private stakeholders, whether it's creditors, landlords, suppliers, customers. I think overall, it's fair to say that businesses were not pushed into bankruptcy in droves, and that they tend to receive a level of support that sometimes went far further that could what could normally have been anticipated. There was certainly a sense of we're all in this together. Let's help each other out, and stakeholders have generally kept their heads cool and tended to avoid knee-jerk reactions or harsh measures or anything that could be perceived as overreacting or as being unfair on someone else. Nevertheless, 2020 has not been a year in limbo, and in particular in the field of insolvency laws and regulation across the countries. It's been a very, very busy year with a number of essential changes in the frameworks that are going to be of the utmost importance going forward in 2021. So I think perhaps Gert can lead us through a high-level review of these, of the most important changes.
Thank you very much, Alain, and let me also thank you and ESHP for inviting me today and share some insights. I would say, on the one hand, would be my first part, just to have 2020 in review from a legal perspective, and then move on quickly as we can to 2021 with, on the one hand, interesting developments on new restructuring proceedings becoming available in Europe, and secondly, some new EU initiatives that might also be relevant for turnaround practice. So I would say indeed 2020 has been quite remarkable. We're saying today, rest in peace 2020, but for sure it was not a dull year. I would say the pace of legal developments have been unprecedented, especially in the field of restructuring and insolvency law. Many changes in a pace which we would not see before. And from early March, it was quickly detected that the size and the magnitude of these macroeconomic distortions did not work with the regular insolvency frameworks, both for liquidation but as well for restructuring, were suitable to deal with this new situation. And as such, legislators and policymakers would in particular have to step up and prevent the aforementioned tsunami. So I know at least one association took up very quickly in addressing all of the European legislators in March, the Conference of European Restructuring and Insolvency Law, which I could assist at the time, and where legislators were urged, first of all, to suspend the duty to file for insolvency. It's something we see, I think, commonly in Germany and Switzerland, and possibly several other European countries, and is basically an instant road to insolvency proceedings in the context of the changing economic situation due to the COVID-19 measures. A second step, which was pointed out to be of core importance, was to introduce especially non-insolvency measures, but in order to enable businesses as well as the entrepreneurs to resolve their illiquidity. And besides this initial step, many legislators have taken further steps to flatten the insolvency curve, each surprisingly or not surprisingly within the European context, traveling in independent roads, but we can see some common denominators. Various countries which already had a stronger restructuring toolbox have seen it fit not to introduce many new proceedings, but especially try to make amendments so that these pre-insolvency proceedings would also become available to companies that would be already in an insolvency situation. I think France is a clear example of that. Other examples that were taking place were also amending the rights to file, as well as suspending or postponing courts to hear requests for opening insolvency proceedings, all in an effort to prevent the formal start of insolvency proceedings and trying to provide for some hibernation, enabling the debtors in this case to weather the storm. The second important step has been the introduction of new restructuring proceedings. And this was a development that we've seen, for instance, in the UK with their Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act, which introduced a new restructuring plan. But also the Dutch approach was not so much to amend current features of insolvency law, but rather introduce a new restructuring proceeding that would make it better able to deal with companies also in fierce distress. And I'll tell a bit more about that in a minute. And lastly, we've seen I would say, a large wave of non-insolvency measures, which were equally important to prevent many companies from imminent entering into insolvency proceedings. And as Alain was just mentioning, that's been in part by measures introduced by the state, guarantees, loans, subsidies, furlough, but as well a lot of private parties that have been flexible in arranging or dealing with outstanding debts. But the question is, has this been effective? Well, remarkable for many people making estimations or envisaging what would happen in the main part of 2020. No tsunamis, and I can say, at least for the Netherlands, we are at a historic low, and therefore just following the bankruptcy statistics, 2020 was in fact a very good year. But we all know that that is not the full picture, and starting with 2021, hoping to see a lift of most of the restrictive measures with regard to COVID-19, hoping that the economy can pick up. We will probably see many companies still facing heightened levels of debt, limited levels of cash, and probably not being able to pick up as soon as they could do, or as good as they could do before the crisis. So at least this brings me to new developments with regard to preventive restructuring. It was in 2019 that the EU adopted a restructuring directive, a directive also referred to as the Preventive Restructuring Directive, which has been a driver to create all across Europe new and more effective restructuring regimes. And these have been mimicked in particular to the well-known Chapter 11 in the US, but also the schemes of arrangement, which many of you will know from the UK. Implementation of these new rules, which allow for a lot of flexibility for each of the member states, are currently envisaged to be taken place by July 2021. However, given all the circumstances that we've seen in the last year, it will not be a surprise that many jurisdictions will apply for a one-year extension. However, many developments are to be expected. What can we expect in particular? Well, we will see certain countries which already have a very extensive insolvency toolbox. Again, a particular example is France, which probably is already fully in line with this directive and will make some amendments, but is generally quite ready to go. Italy, another jurisdiction which was already envisaging to introduce a new extensive reform of its insolvency legislation, has postponed that in the past year, and now will probably, before implementing it or adopting it, also incorporate elements to make it fully in line with this new restructuring directive. Particular interesting, I think, will also be jurisdictions that will now introduce fully new restructuring proceedings, because they will become more competitive with maybe insolvency hubs that we've been looking at before. And as of January 2021, we can name in particular Germany and the Netherlands that have each introduced a new restructuring proceeding. In Germany, it is the abbreviated Stahoek, and in the Netherlands, it is the WOA, and both are scheme of arrangement-like proceedings, completely novel in their jurisdictions, which are involve limited involvement of the court, are strongly party-driven, enable the debtor to remain in possession and over a plan of restructuring, and in particular, in pursuit of adopting a restructuring plan to secure the viability of the business. Interestingly, and even though they are no member of the EU anymore, we've seen a notable development in this regard also in the UK. With their new restructuring plan and moratorium, they have set to be desiring to stay at the forefront of insolvency law, although at the same time, I think the alignment between these new proceedings and the preventive restructuring directive is quite obvious. And it's interesting to see that also the UK is making sure that within the European spectrum, they are up to date and aligned with what other European countries are doing. However, this new restructuring plan in the UK, as far as I've seen, has been applied only in a few cases. Most exemplary, I think, is Virgin Atlantic. So we have to see if that will also will track practitioners and debtors to make good use of it. But in any case, these developments all across Europe, in all the EU member states, will, I think, heighten the need for turnaround managers, both in developing restructuring plans, supporting the management, but most probably also in the implementation of these new plans. Brings me to the third and final part that I wanted to share with you today, the new initiatives taken by the European Commission. In 2020, they announced already that just focusing on restructuring or pre-insolvency regimes was not enough to make a more coherent European insolvency regime available. However, complexities about very convergent key building blocks of European of national insolvency laws has prevented to do anything in that regard. New now will be steps to further harmonize these building blocks. And I want to mention, I think, the four elements that are in particular relevant also to turnaround practice, and which we will hear more about in the coming year, and especially probably the coming years even. A key first element is the prerequisites for insolvency proceedings. And in particular, when should insolvency proceedings be commenced? When is there a duty to file? Or how should we deal with elements of insolvency tests? The European Commission will try to seek a more harmonized approach all across Europe when the requirements for filing for insolvency are to be met. Other elements will be avoidance actions. So what are the conditions? What is the duration for being able to invoke avoidance actions? Notably, directors' duties. This was in part discussed when the European Restructuring Directive was developed, but many European member states were really reluctant to do anything in that regard. And now the Commission is taking a new effort to see, can we better harmonize what are the duties, directors, and even including de facto directors in the zone of insolvency. And lastly, but not less importantly, the position of secured creditors will be included in that as well. There are quite some distinctions on what the position is of a secured creditor in insolvency proceedings, also in aspects of ranking. And attempts will be made to get a more harmonized approach on how we rank creditors in insolvency proceedings. So I would say these initiatives are not only core to insolvency practice, but also to turnaround practice. And I think it's important for you to stay not only tuned, but maybe also to become involved in how these elements should be developed for a more harmonized European insolvency framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gert. So on that basis, what should we all expect for 2021? From where I stand, I think one of the domains that will be at least as much in the spotlight, if not more than in 2020, is the whole broad area of government support. And I think this will be put under perhaps a more intense critical scrutiny as it was in 2020 when everybody was shocked. One issue are the many claims or numerous claims of bureaucracy and inefficiency of the various state support programs. Generally, the moral hazard of whether they are, preventing the failure of sound companies, which is obviously what they are trying to do, or whether they are preventing the rational sanction of business models who are fundamentally flawed, and business models or management styles which are fundamentally flawed and should be allowed to let fail. The other main dimension, which is becoming more and more scrutinized, is the level of regulatory uncertainty and flip-flopping around. This has been quite extraordinary indeed when you look across Europe, and in total lack of coordination between the countries. Just to name a few examples from the top of my head, if you look at, for instance, Austria, a country next door from where I currently are, when the government decided I'm talking about the recent current lockdown, okay, when they decided to lock down the country and have shops and restaurants and small businesses completely shut, they agreed that they would compensate. That was in November, only 2 months ago, that they would compensate this company with a subsidy for 80% of the turnover, which is extraordinarily high. Having said that and done that, and they did deliver on it, by the way, the money arrived. Then in December, they said, no, it's going to be only 50%. And then in January, they said, no, actually, we're only going to compensate going forward for the fixed costs. But they didn't decide, they didn't define what exactly the fixed costs were. And then now they're saying, in addition, there will be a ceiling at about 800,000, a maximum of 800,000 euros per company, regardless of the size of the company. So it's kind of, running around like headless chicken, and nobody knows what's going to hit them next month in terms of a contradictory or new policy enacted. This is not an isolated case. If you take the larger and usually more steady neighbor of Germany, in November and December 2020, so if just a few months back, they were compensating shutdown companies with 75% of the prior year turnover. Okay, however much this would be decided. And then in January, they said, no, we're going to change the system. We're only going to compensate for 90% of the fixed costs. Interestingly, unlike Austria, they were kind enough to define what the fixed costs were. And indeed, as it were, it only includes in Germany rental costs and financing costs. But still, there is still that uncertainty of how is it going to change again. In the UK, I think that there have been a number of webinars that focus on the UK, so I'll be quicker here. But one point which is really striking is the re-establishment or reinstatement of HMRC, of the tax office, as a preferential creditor. I think the least one can say about it is that it is a surprising timing. It will definitely make asset-based lending much more difficult because secured creditors will be too high. I think I've read somewhere or heard somewhere that it was even blamed as one of the key reasons behind the biggest or one of the biggest retail failures in Europe, which is the downfall of Arcadia in the UK. And we pull pressure definitely on industry as much as it does on retail. So I think it will be quite an interesting space to watch in terms of what's happening and what's changing all the time with the different government support programs. Another area where I see we will see some action is that I think 2021 will really be the year where landlords get in trouble. They were reasonably flexible, and we saw already at the back end of 2020 the first renegotiations of arrival of turnover-based variable rent or grace periods or agreement exits and the like. But I think 2021 will really see this movement accelerating. 2021, interestingly, is also the first year of the post-Brexit era. And as I'm sure has not escaped your attention, the cross-border automatic recognition of procedures is no more. It's gone to meet its creator. It's deceased. So this is obviously a very, very big deal for cross-border restructurings. Some of us know and have already witnessed that a few creative lawyers are trying to get around this issue by exploring to what extent perhaps provisions of, say, the Lugano Convention or some other legal tools at their disposal which remain valid may offer some avenues that can be explored towards trying to optimize cross-border restructurings. But this will be definitely breaking new ground, and we are venturing now into uncharted territory. What will really be interesting to see, I don't know if Gert has any view to that. He can say so in a minute. But to what extent this will prove the milestone or the defining moment when perhaps other European venues will stand up to progressively, if not replace London, at least come to at the same par of London, to become the area of focus or the place of focus for large cross-border restructuring in several European countries. Gert, you've mentioned the Starhoek in Germany that could position Frankfurt as an international center, or the WOA in Amsterdam that could position Amsterdam as an international center. Do you have anything else you want to add in this respect, or have you said it already? Is it too early to say?
Well, a few thoughts. I think on the one hand, it's quite novel, I would say, now that we will be getting more jurisdiction, especially I think Germany and the Netherlands, with a very expertise both court system as well as practitioners to support the legal proceedings in I think also in a very efficient way, and are pairing up, having to have similar proceedings now as we would have seen already before in the UK. So definitely, I think as long as there are no easy solutions for recognition and enforcement of new insolvency proceedings within the European context, the WOA and the Netherlands, and especially the German Staruk, will have particular benefits.
Yeah.
Very interesting for these two. I want to point out is their approach to make a distinction between some part of the proceeding which would fall under the European insolvency regulation and thus require that you can open that proceeding only in a jurisdiction where it has its center. The UK judges have been very, I think, effective in assuming that COMI could be also in the UK. Well, in these new approaches, both in the Staruk and also in the WOA, it is also an alternative to have a proceeding which is a restructuring proceeding, probably will be recognized all across Europe, but does not fall under the European insolvency regulation. And as such, it's more open and more flexible to pursue cross-border restructurings, for instance, in the Netherlands or in Germany, and still have this recognition all across Europe.
Excellent. So other than this, I think for 2021, we all know, and it's been said already a few times today, that we start the year with a much more fragilized economic tissue in general, and that the new lockdowns we are currently more or less all of us experiencing are likely to push many businesses over the line. I think it's fair to say that many sectors need to get fit for purpose again post-pandemic. We're going to, time permitting, after Hadrien has spoken, maybe I would be able to say a little bit more about this with a particular focus on retail, hospitality, or travel or business traveling. But it's fair also to say that many businesses which have a valid reason to exist, have great customers, have great order books, will find themselves in a place where they have no cash whatsoever and no unmortgaged assets left and no way to raise new finance, and will need to find a solution in an emergency spot and in a difficult spot. So insolvencies certainly will be on the rise again, but we all know that they typically destroy a lot of value. So to the extent they can be avoided, it's always a good idea to do so. The question is, or the many questions are, how will courts across the continent look at valuation issues in the context of companies which, as I said, have a great business model, have great customers, should have a lot of value, but actually are worth zero or even a negative amount because they need some refinancing and cash injection. How will the tax liabilities be considered in the UK now that the HMRC is a secured creditor again? How do you conduct proper due diligence in this context? How do you appraise the value of the assets and the value of the business? Hadrien, you are a special situation investor. How do you see that?
Thank you, Alain, for all this, and not an easy question to answer too. If you don't mind, I would just step back a little bit and just confirm that I fully agree with you guys that 2020 was not as active as we thought it could be, considering the the environment. I mean, just to give you a couple of figures, I know Gert talked about the Netherlands, but in France, insolvencies went down by 48%. The UK, things went down by 33%. So it really feels like people are struggling to move once we are in the middle of the of the eye of the storm, and everybody's like a dare quotes in the headlights of a car, basically, for the time being. And so we all thought that would be for a couple of months, and it seems that that situation is just extending, basically. I mean, what I'm trying to when thinking about this theme of 20 versus 21, I'm trying to think about what happened in the last crisis in 07 and 08. And we had, a similar scheme. It's like the whole system had frozen. Was difficult to do deals, and then pipeline starting to move. 1 or 2 years after, and then there's been an avalanche of opportunities in terms of turnaround and restructuring. I think the big difference between 07, 08 and now is that 07, 08 was a liquidity crisis. The whole system blocked. There was not much money available. The money was there, but very difficult to access or to invest it. And also there was additional regulation that were put in place at that time that basically froze the system. And so the first step was like freezing of the system, followed by an economic crisis, which impacted those businesses in general, and then sovereign debt crisis. But I think today is very different. We have a situation where a bit everything is impacted, but there's no liquidity problem. The central banks have been pumping a lot of money in the system in the past few years. The governments have just opened up the vans of money. Markets are high up. There's a lot of dry powder. So it's a very different kind of environment, as we could see in 07 and 08. Still 2020, as we say, has been frozen because everybody is living in uncertainty. And when I was preparing this talk, I was like, figuring what is the word I will use the most, and it's uncertainty. And it feels that uncertainty is everywhere, basically. But trying to think about the environment and how we could look through the market today. I would say that there are probably three different situations. Or the first one is those companies that were going through already a shift on their market. So typically retail being digitalized. We know that many business models were weakened, and then the COVID crisis just the thing that started up the role restructuring for them. So these ones we're already seeing them happening. We've seen a lot of retail bankruptcies, and that's basically the deals that we hear about now. So when we had this feeling that some stuff are happening, is actually those businesses that were already struggling. After, I think what is more interesting for us, because it's probably what's going to happen in the future, it's first is those businesses that have a nice business model, has not been too much disrupted, but had to take on more leverage during this period and probably in the next 6 months. These ones, we don't hear about them for time being because they're being helped by the government. They get more financing in at nice conditions, and so they don't need to move for the time being. But in probably 2 or 3 years time, there's going to be a need to clean up their balance sheet, and there might be some opportunities there from an investor point of view. And then the third category of businesses that I would see are those business that their business model are completely disrupted by COVID. They can also have a balance sheet problem, but their main problem is that their business is no longer what it used to be. And for these ones, even if they're struggling now, management teams or shareholders, stakeholders still hope that things are going to come back. Just need to wait another month, another 2, another 3, another 6, another year, and then we'll go back to what it was before. So in those ones, people don't really want to move. They want to believe they've come back to before. They know that there will be different changes, but they're not really sure. And I believe that for those businesses, business models have completely shifted, and there will be several sequences for them to come back to a certain level of normality. We're going to have yo-yo effects between their whole business coming back, and then, being a structurally change after. So again, the word is going to be, uncertainty there. And for me, that's, the main difference between 07 and 08 and now is that in 07, 08, we knew there was a crisis, we knew there was an impact, but probably it wouldn't change that. It hasn't changed that many business model at the same time. Today, it's completely different. So, if we're trying to, ride through this uncertainty and try to put a timing on, I think, things are going to start probably moving in, half of 21, hopefully. As we saw, for funding is still, quite hard to execute on certain transactions. Everybody is hiding in its cave. Companies are not forced to move because of the government support. And as Alain underlined it, there's this feeling of, all stakeholders trying to maintain, the status quo, basically. But after that period, when people are going to have to move, I think there's going to be a massive polarization of the different assets available in the market. Companies in software, for example, will continue to see very high multiple. The business we're doing well, we've been doing well through that period, will still to be chased by the classic guys. And then there will be a massive, pocket of, turn assets or complex assets that will need to be addressed. And so in this, as an investor, I think, and it's basically a follow-up of, the three kind of situation I was mentioning is, there will be those situations of businesses where their balance sheet will look like nothing, but their business model has not been too much disrupted. And this will be mostly a balance sheet restructuring exercise. And on the other side, those businesses where basically entire parts of the market will have disappeared. And on this one will be, more about operations. How do you address the new market? How do you transform completely the companies inside out, basically? And actually, probably the bad news is that we're going to see a lot of situations where there's going to be the two. You will need to restructure the balance sheet and need to, spend quite a lot of time redesigning those businesses, basically. Yeah. And so, thinking about this, we're trying to figure out, okay, let's try to build a matrix to figure out where those businesses will be, or where we can find those businesses. And actually, I was thinking maybe having a segment or sector by sector approach, but I think it's going to be much more complicated. Of course, some sector are obvious, there's an obvious, game change. But for most of them, it's going to have to be a very granular analysis of those companies, talking to the respective customers, suppliers, really understanding each piece of the supply chain and see how structurally everything has changed. So a lot of uncertainty and complexity to address in the future. And I would say also, for those business on which probably nothing will happen, they won't need for turnaround or hardcore restructuring, there's still going to be a question about, all that leverage has been put on those companies that are government backed. At some point, it's going to have to be cleaned up in a way or the other. So in 2 or 3 or 4 years, we're going to see another movement of needing to work on those balance sheets. Just 1 or 2 points before cutting it. I would say, talking about uncertainty, I think there's also another uncertainty about the macro environment, because obviously we know that a massive crisis is coming. Unemployment rates are going to go up, after all those government-backed schemes are going to end. So we know there's going to be a massive impact. At the same time, there's been a lot of savings, in the consumer pocket in the past few months, the past year. And so these could have a positive impact on, consumption in the general economy. So, again, a lot of uncertainty in which direction we're going to go. It's not going to be all rose, but and just one last thing on valuation. There's going to be a massive question about the valuation issues. As I said, it's not a liquidity problem today. There's a lot of money, a lot of dry powder, so there's going to be a lot of money chasing actually a lot of deals, but we see that valuations, markets are still up and valuations are not going down, which is counter-natural when you think about the amount of uncertainty that we're going to see. So, from my point of view, what will be really important is to, really go to deep value, making sure to, invest at the not really the right time, because timing is difficult, but at least at the right value in order not to take much risk. And that's why it's going to be difficult, because there's going to be a lot of competition with a lot of money. At the same time, we all have a limited, amount of time. So bandwidth of investors is going to be limited. So they might, all fly to the same target. So that's going to be the challenge to address in the next few months and years.
Thank you very much, Hadrien, for these many insights. Looking at 2010 and I'm really keen. I'm just have an eye on the watch. I'm really keen to make sure that we have enough time for Q&A in the end. But so I'll try to be very quick. But when we discussed, we amongst others, we thought it could be interesting to share with the audience a number of observations or nuggets or data spots or data dots that you can we can link together. With respect to the most affected industries or sectors, which, as we all know, no prizes for guessing, would be retail, property, hotels, travel, and leisure and hospitality. But just perhaps to beyond the obvious, just to state a few things, Hadrien has just said not everyone has been negatively affected. There are already, and there will be, of course, more people that will be negatively affected, that will lose their jobs and their livelihoods, and who are, by the way, expecting it and therefore saving money and trying to cut down their budgets on everything, which has an impact on many sectors, including retail. But not only that, there are also winners. There are people whose jobs and income security have not been affected, but who have actually not been able to spend the money on pretty much anything. They saved on commuting costs, they saved on holidays, they saved on restaurants and theaters and leisure activities. So at the end of the day, some of those are also trading up in terms of their brand loyalty. And one very interesting figure that I found that I wanted to share with you, McKinsey, the consultancy, says that 75% of US adults have changed their brand habits, and that traditional brand loyalties are completely shattered. The winners trade up, the losers and the younger folks trade down. But the real loser in terms of businesses in the retail space are the mid-range brands, those who are neither budget nor exclusive or luxury. And I find this bifurcation, there was a time when we were speaking about a K-shaped recovery, not V, not W, not L, but K-shaped, with a bifurcation between winners and losers, that this is likely to resonate quite a lot in the retail space. In the retail space, we all know as well, stereotype that brick and mortars are losing to e-commerce and online shopping. But what perhaps still needs or still bears being said is the sheer magnitude of that shift. In the UK, the previous growth forecast for e-commerce for the coming 6 years, 2021 to 2026, has been actually achieved in the last 6 months of 2020. So 6 years of growth forecast achieved in 6 months. So of course, after the end of the lockdown, people will go out shopping again in stores, and this will recede a little, but this will not go back to where it was before. And the one UK DIY chain called B&Q reported 164% growth last year in click and collect. Just to give you, one isolated example, the e-commerce share of retail in the UK as well went from 20% pre-COVID in one go to 40% of all retail sales. So the sheer magnitude of that transfer to e-commerce has been absolutely mind-numbing, and will continue certainly to do so. with respect to retail, this will bring this bifurcation between losers and winners that Hadrien was mentioning. Obviously, the losers will be in the city centers. The winners will be the convenience stores, also the budget retail brands, and also with an interesting trend that Gordon Brothers has spotted towards conscious consumerism, where they say that they are forecasting a growth of 300% in 3 years in the circular economy for clothing and for furniture. So that will certainly be an area where some business models can be reinvented, or where there is an avenue for growth for those businesses that can explore this. There's also no question that commercial property will get hit quite hard. But one also data point which bears mentioning is that in one study I saw that 83% of businesses across the board, whether it's industry, whether it's retail, whatever, 83% of all businesses are looking at reducing their office space for the long term whenever they can, whether they see that as an emergency, whether they are going to try to stop paying rent and renegotiate with their landlords, or whether they will just keep quiet until their lease expires, but just simply not renew the lease and move out to some smaller properties or less central properties or whatever they want to do. But that will definitely spell trouble for many landlords. Talking about landlords and moving perhaps from property to hotels, I think, again, what we've seen in 2020 and what is likely to remain true for 2021, and to an extent also even beyond, is that, again, there will be losers and winners. The losers are already and will continue to be this year the business hotels, the airport hotels, the city center hotels, and even the luxury hotels, perhaps not immediately intuitive, but luxury hotels because simply the international visitors are not coming any longer. But there will also be winners. The winners were already in 2020, the staycation hotels, the leisure hotels in coastal locations where people stayed closer to home to still enjoy a nice experience at the seaside, but also serviced apartments for work from home, for isolation as well, in case people need to isolate themselves from their family if they have been in contact or if they are sick, and limiting the interactions with other folks. And in terms of operational restructuring, the consequences, I think we are seeing already a number of hotels who are reinventing their business model partially by converting rooms into either residential property, student accommodation, co-working spaces, or even in some cases in countries which are particularly hard affected, into retirement villages. Talk about the silver economy. So there is resilience. Also, a previous panelist on the previous event, I think he was from Knight Frank, if I'm not mistaken, pointed out, and it's very true in my mind, that there is a safe haven characteristic of property that will eventually attract as equity holders as well as bond holders and debt investors again in the future. So watch that space, because it's not all demise. What is finally, before I turn to questions, also worth noting is the disaster of, in particular, business travel. But again, no prizes for guessing, but there are perhaps a few points that I wanted to bring to your attention that you might be interested to know. One study, I'm not quite sure about its methodology, to be honest, but it pretended, interestingly, that travel and leisure was directly and indirectly together accountable for no fewer than 14%, 1/4, of all jobs worldwide. And as we know as well, but then the data points can be interesting, business travel represented 30% of the airline's revenue pre-pandemic, but up to 75% on some international routes, like the typical London to New York or other similar typical business shuttle routes. But it also accounted for 70% of the revenues of business hotel chains, such as Marriott. So there will be a very strong pressure to reinvent a business model there, because we all know leisure travel will come back to an extent. I said to an extent because people are becoming more and more environmental conscious, and they will have also financial challenges that will make it difficult perhaps to spend the same amount of pounds or euros on holiday budgets than they used to. But nevertheless, I think we will all be very very glad when we can step into a plane again and go on holidays to a nice place somewhere. However, business travel will not come back that easily. And the industry experts, of course, nobody knows, argue as to what is going to be the long-term sustainable drop in demand for business travel. But some experts say no less than 30% drop long-term. Others say up to 50% drop. But either way, with the figures I've given before as to the impact it has on the profitability and revenues of a number of business models, from airlines to hotel chains to tourism to whatever, the impact of the profitability of the sector will be absolutely massive. Talking about impact on profitability, one last thing I forgot to mention about retail, but which is worth noting. I think it was Gordon Brother or another company that noted that in their experience, for every 1% of shift of turnover from bricks and mortar to e-commerce, because you still had the fixed costs of bricks and mortars, but you didn't have the revenues any longer, and you had more variable costs for e-commerce because you still needed to pay transportation for the deliveries to some extent. So for each 1% of turnover shift, you are seeing a 7% hit on your gross margin. And that's also quite interesting to bear in mind when it comes to sustainable business models in the future. Sure, you can move your business model from bricks and mortar to e-commerce, but maybe this is not going to allow you to support your fixed costs in the same way as before. So, and a final, back to, sorry for the excerpt, but the final comeback on airline. It may also be interesting to remember that after the great financial crisis of 2008 and 2010, business travel did come back, but it took full 5 years to fully recover from the global financial crisis. So we're not looking here at a situation where we say, let's have the vaccinations, vaccination programs going in 2021 and in 2022 or latest 2023, everything will be perfect again. So I think it's fair to say, as a few parting words before the questions, that in 2021 it will all be about accelerated change. Things will not come back as they were before. There are a number of good news. Hadrien made the point already. There's a lot of dry powder. Liquidity is everywhere. There's also a very strong appetite for M&A, a strong appetite in the syndication market because of abundant liquidity as well. The value deteriorations we're likely to see in the short term are likely to be balanced by long-term prospects, which will remain attractive for a number of companies and a number of sectors, which will be a bonanza for bottom fishers and for value investors. And it would be an historic opportunity to enter the markets where, or the companies which previously had not been accessible, or where there was limited access or limited supply. So everyone, I think, will need to be brave, to be flexible, to be nimble, but there will be plenty of splendid opportunities to take. With that, I will finally shut up and open the floor to questions. Yes, Manuel.
Yes. First of all, thank you very much for your very, very interesting panel in order to understand what is the current situation, your different jurisdiction. As you can imagine, I'm a lawyer, so this is why I use the term jurisdiction. But I was listening to you, Alain, talking about how the travel and the hospitality and the leisure industry is struggling, okay, all over the Europe. Obviously, I'm from Spain, and obviously this is one of our main industries here. And in other point of your intervention, and also Hadrien and Gert mentioned the same. It is pretty obvious that in any country in Europe, the public aid has been a common measure to try to deal with this crisis. Okay. But my question or my comment is the following. Here in Spain, the first public aid package was released in March. Okay, basically it was based on, to try to help the companies to cover the workforce cost. I mean, the salaries of the employees, and also a financing line established by the government in order to help the companies, but to provide them with easy financing, okay? But now we are debating here in Spain and other measures, but what I miss here in my country is that nobody is speaking about how viable is the recipient of this public aid. Okay, and I think this is one of our main problems. I mean, the public aid is shared or spread, no matter if you prove that you have a company, a viable business or a viable company. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is my comment. And this, what I would like to say is, what I would like to know is if in your countries, in France, in the Netherlands, and so on, you feel the same, or it is the same, or on the contrary, the recipient of the public aids are in some manner obliged to prove their viability before receiving the aid. Thank you.
It's a very interesting point, Manuel, and I would say perhaps Gert-Jan will be welcome to either compliment or even contradict me. You're welcome if I err. But from what I'm seeing, there is a very varied situation from country to country. In Switzerland, where I sit, this is in fact the only country where I'm aware of. There must be some other ones, but I'm not aware of the other ones, where there is some sort of a test that apart from being in a healthy situation at the end of 2019, I think many countries have said that if you are already struggling at the end of 2019, you are not available to state aid in 2020 on the back of the pandemics. But that's a very thin precondition. It does not address the case, as you said, and the moral hazard really of businesses which have broken business models or poor management. And who just do not deserve to survive the crisis of 2020. Switzerland, as I was saying, is the only country where I'm aware that there are some sort of tests to your financial statement and financial sanity before you can receive aid, or how much aid you can receive is based on this. I'm not aware of that in other countries. And indeed, there is this moral hazard everywhere else. Anybody has a different observation?
Maybe I can just say one thing about that. First is my own experience, because I finance a portfolio company in the UK. I thought it would. I started the process in March, and I thought it's going to be a quick and easy, dirty work to do, and actually it took me 6 months and producing tons of business plan, double check, due diligence, etc. It was actually harder to refinance through the government money than doing the initial deal actually. So I know there's been a lot of discussion about money being thrown, but that's not my experience, at least in the UK. Maybe it's different in different sectors or with different credit providers. But that is my experience. The thing I would say is, I think governments are aware that they are not going to recover all the money. But if you look at the example of France, the initial pocket was 330 billion of loan guaranteed by the state. And the reasoning has always been, well, if we got a 10% or 15% of those loans were not repaid and the companies goes bust, well, but so what? We spend 30 or 45 billion of loss that, was going to go into the massive debt burden that we already have. We can spread, paying that back over, 50 years, because the pandemic happens every 100 years, basically. So, over 50 or 100 years, and that's it. At least we saved, 80 or 85% of the business, thanks to that. Personally, I wouldn't be too worried about this unless there is an impact on the sovereign debt. And if we again have another crisis as we've had, between 2012 and 2015 on the euro and the sovereign debts across Europe, that's where I would start to be worried.
Thank you, Hadrien. Other questions, comments?
Well, in between, maybe I can just add something in response to the question of Emmanuel.
Of course.
And I think it reflects also a bit what Hadrien was, I think, mentioning, or Alain, with regard to Austria, where the state funding has been so flexible, so to say, or changing every few months. I did hear backward the Netherlands, also the perceptions at the times when these packages were prepared were quite different each time. So when it came in April, the idea was, well, we'll do this up until June and then the economy will be open again. But when we were in June, we realized that we might be in it for a long haul, and the package was redesigned so that it would decrease over time. And this week they announced a new package and saying, well, we're nearly there. The vaccine is ready. So we need to give this final injection to prevent that we just missed the boat. So that's the formal answer, at least as far as I can see in the Netherlands. Then there are the practical things. The Dutch have elections in less than 2 months, so there's no political party now saying that we need to cut these budgets so strictly. So we'll have to see how things will evolve in time. But yeah, I think it's also very much here also inspired by the political framework that we're in at the moment.
Other questions?
We don't have any questions in the chat at all.
So we must have been terribly boring. No, Greg has one.
Yeah, I just wanted to say also the pandemic might have an impact not just on the balance sheet, but also on the items which are off balance sheets. I take an example. I was called 2 weeks ago. In Switzerland, we have the watch industry, which is doing very well. And they deal with precious material and consignments. And actually, this is a big issue now because some banks have given money to companies or loans for buying precious material, or even using that in their stock for producing. But now, when you see actually the price of gold or platinum, things like that, it has been to the roof. And that's actually, it's a big impact now. And consignment stocks, which have been also sent abroad or to distributors or to retailers, and these guys actually, you don't know if they are going to be safe or get bankrupt or things like that. That has a huge impact on the company. So off-balance sheet items will be also a big issue for this year, I'm sure.
That's a very interesting point. Thank you, Greg.
I do have a comment as well following Greg's remarks, which is quite interesting because once there are government help and packages to rescue some of the businesses, and particularly here in the UK with the bounce back loans and the CBILS, I am worried about when the directors finally have to realize our business model is no way, any way forward, and they decided to throw the towel. What will be the impact? Obviously, for turnaround, hopefully we are able to actually gain and have deliver proper advice and help these directors. But is the impact of the personal liabilities, because here in the UK, there is no, there is now, if you have assets as directors or stakeholders, you're still in the fire line if your business fails. So it's, I am curious how insolvencies will affect, particularly those on the decision-making chair. And in fact, if you become an interim director, how do how your role will be affected by turning around the business if it doesn't succeed? So there is a lot of uncertainty, and Greg's comments is quite profound on that. Don't worry.
Yes, I think that's a very fair point, Maria. Thank you for this. Yeah. And Gert mentioned that there are some thoughts as to unifying the director's duties across Europe, but that's obviously looking quite far into the future. I mean, this will probably get done by when, Gert? 2023, 2024. In any event, it's not going to be a tool that we can use this year, right?
No. Just say that the directive that needs to be implemented either this year or next year will harmonize very generic elements with regard to director's duties. And the further steps to put more flesh on the bones are envisaged, I think, to be in the subsequent years to be really set in stone. So that will take some time. Yeah.
I've a general comment, really, and thanks very much for a very interesting discussion of perspectives. I think, as you rightly point out, those. What I think from a turnaround manager's point of view, I mean, we're always trying to, how are we going to get work? Things have not been very good last year. What should we be doing? How should we be promoting ourselves? I think one thing that we should bear in mind, although we don't know when this is going to end, I think that, as you rightly pointed out, if you apply some rational analysis to this, you can see in a way which way it's going. And there are some companies, quite a number of companies really, that should be planning now for the post-COVID economy. They should be, although they may not be able to, with a great deal of accuracy, work out what their revenue streams are going to be, they should have a general idea in which direction it's going, and they should be now actually planning and putting into place some of those turnaround, basic turnaround disciplines. You pointed out in the property sector that you may have to use your property in a different way. We've begun to see one or two instances of that where people now are beginning to say, okay, my business is going to be a little different. We have a potential client now whose end product is very much, or some of it's in the aviation sector, and we all know that Airbus and Boeing are cutting back their production programs. This company now knows it's got too many sites, it's got to rationalize, and so it's looking at that. This is we're not sure at the moment whether this is how much the company is in distress, but we do know that it needs to rationalize, and I think this is an area where we should be looking at as turnaround managers to promote, taking a very proactive view and saying this is going to end. A common sense approach to this can get you to know where you've got to be. That may not tell you exactly what your funding requirements are, but if you've got an idea of where you're going to be in about 9 months, 12 months time, that will give you an idea of what vehicle you're going to have to use, whether you've got to bring in a private equity investor, whether you've got to dilute your equity, whether you've got to look for a merger, and all these things. And I think this is what we should be looking at in the next 6 months in terms of how we should be promoting our skill sets as turnaround people. It's not just doing something immediately before distress. It's be proactive, and I think there is an opportunity there. And I think that at EACTP we should be promoting that idea, and it's something just from an EACTP point of view. By the way, we are. Now that we've got we're just about finalised the training program, and that'll be going live in the next two or 3 months, and we'll market that for young professionals. We've also got to market as well the skill set of turnaround professionals to to the broader industry of what we can do to help them plan their way out of this program. So our marketing approach will be very much on that line. So I'm not despondent on this. It's been a quiet year. I've actually, even at my old age, Alain, I'm actually quite looking forward to what's going to go on in the next year. I think it's going to be an interesting year. A lot of change, and change brings opportunities. And that's what we are. We are change managers, effectively. So those are my comments, and I thought that was an extremely good panel, very informative. I would just ask Hadrien one question: is in a way, how do you look at the market now in terms of investment? Do you see it? Are you waiting a little bit for opportunities? Are you very active in looking for situations, even though the market, it can be sometimes difficult to do that top level line in a business plan?
Yeah, so am I very active? Yes, because I always try to be. That being said, you see there's a lot of challenge in looking at the opportunities themselves, because 19 is completely different than 20. As a side, people are still in the eye of the storm. So, management teams just think, well, we're just going to have to wait and it's going to come back the way it is. So you just spend a lot of time and a lot of back and forth, exchanging about the uncertainty and the businesses. And basically COVID catch up with you all the time. Basically, there's something new that is coming. So you need to reassess the position and everything you do, every month or every 2 months, basically. So I'm being very active, yes, trying to build a pipeline. But I'm not a fool that it's going to be really difficult to deploy cash and to invest in the next few weeks or months. There's also physical constraints to doing deals basically these days with lockdowns, etc. So there's a lot of noise, a lot of people are trying to talk, but it's really difficult to get things down basically.
Well, that's it's extremely difficult to do due diligence when when you can't get out. And I think we, in the turnaround space in particular, have depended a lot on intuition, being able to sit in, kick the tires, as they say, look and talk to the management and get the feel of where the problems are. It's very difficult to do that from a distance. Yeah, and I think we're going to have to learn how. That's a new trick we're going to have to learn. We're all Zoom experts now, of course. But it's not the same as personal contact, in my opinion. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's a debate between old school and new school. I think business is people, and especially in turnaround situations where there's a lot of psychology around things, about the team and the people, etc. I find it very challenging to do just deals on Zoom, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a cynic in this, and with this particular potential that we hope to be starting in the next week or so, one of the partners is a Chinese private equity company, and some of the assets are in Germany, and some in the UK, and some are in the Netherlands. And so we were trying to put a team together which covered all these things, and the comment from the Chinese PE, well, there's no point in doing that because you can't travel, and so we just give us one German guy, and that would be enough. And I talking to my partner, I said that's typical, and he said, yeah, he's probably got a spreadsheet that's got all the answers, and of course that is the truth. That because we know from experience, you can look at all the numbers in your life, but the minute that you actually turn up and arrive at the place, that whatever the client told you the problem was, it's not really the real problem, and that is That's the skill set we sell, and it is difficult, as you say. COVID turns up another thing, another problem every day. But we all welcome the time that we can actually get out. But in the meantime, we're going to have to learn these skills.
Yeah.
It's an interesting world.
It's an interesting world. Thank you very much, Alain, for your insights and I think and your wisdom. Are there any further comments or questions that the assistant would like to make? Otherwise, I'm conscious that we are already way beyond the 60 minutes which we had been imparted. So we didn't want to be a burden on the rest of your days. Whether it's lunch or work, there must be something calling out for your time and attention now. So I would otherwise then thank you very much for your attendance and for your questions and comments and presence. If you'd like to continue the conversation offline, you can get hold of us, whether it's per email, per LinkedIn, or which other way. And we'll be looking at seeing you preferably physically or else over Zoom in another ESCTP, TMA, or other event anytime soon.
Yeah,
all the best.
On that note, I'll just say, and Helen will organise this. We plan to have every 2 months to have a webinar, and we welcome anyone with suggestions. We've got ideas of the next two, but even when COVID ends, the ability to exchange views and ideas, it's never a waste of time. You come away with learning something new at every activity. So early March is the next one, isn't it, Helen? And then in May we've got yeah.
Yes, that's right. That's what we're working towards.
Thank you so much, Helen, again, and Alain and ESCTP for hosting this. Thank you to Helen, the other Helen from TMA, for helping with the marketing, with the broader mothership. And see you soon. See you all soon in one of these events.